Welcome to Things You Don't Know. In this episode, we will explore the history of one of humanity's most grisly and ancient practices: assassinations. The idea of controlling the direction of society, gaining power and control, or securing personal gains by murdering an opponent or leader probably predates recorded history. Certainly, it has been practiced by virtually every nation. In this episode, our primary focus will be to give an overview of the history of assassinations while examining the causes and psychology behind these attempts. Hey, before going any further, I want to introduce and welcome Mr. Chandler Foster, who will be joining us today and hopefully for future podcasts.
I too want to welcome you, Chandler, and really look forward to working with you.
Well, Dr. Weaver and Dr. Deneen, thank you very much for allowing me to be here. I really love the broad scope of topics that you all cover and looking forward to joining you hopefully in the future as well.
Anytime. As mentioned, assassinations predate written history. The Egyptian pharaoh Teti from the Old Kingdom's 6th dynasty in the 23rd century BCE, that's 2,500 years ago, friends, is believed to be the earliest known victim of assassination. However, the evidence is circumstantial, mainly due to limited written records. More clearly documented assassinations in ancient Egypt include Amenemhat I of the Middle Kingdom's 12th dynasty in the 20th century BCE, who was killed in his bed by palace guards for unknown reasons, as detailed in the instructions of Amenemhat. Additionally, judicial records from the New Kingdom's 20th dynasty described the assassination of Ramses III in 1155 BCE during a failed coup attempt. Between 550 and 330 BC, several Persian kings of the Achaemenid dynasty were murdered. The famous military book, The Art of War, a 5th century BC Chinese military treatise, discusses assassination tactics and their advantages. Shanaka, 350 to 283 BC, an Indian teacher, philosopher, and royal advisor, elaborated on assassinations in his political treatise, Arthashastra. His student, Chandragupta Maurya, who founded the Maurya Empire of India, used assassination against some of his enemies, including Alexander the Great's generals, Ninor and Philip. In the late Warring States period, in the 3rd century BC in China, the state of Qin rose to power, prompting the Prince of Yan to eliminate the Qin king, Qin Shi Huang, by sending Jing Qi on a mission. The assassination attempt failed, and Jin Qi was killed on the spot. This is even mentioned in religious texts. The Old Testament story of Judith illustrates how she freed the Israelites by deceiving and assassinating Holofernes, the Assyrian war leader, during a conflict between the Israelites and the Assyrians.
Absolutely. And there have been a lot of leaders that have been assassinated, like Alexander the Great's father, Philip of Macedonia. He was considered to be assassinated. And by this time the end of the Republican Empire was coming, and assassination at this point was a main method for a lot of personal gain and political aspirations. If you think about that, you think about the political circle of that era, and you think about the acts that these people committed. They were just so outrageous, but at in during this time, it was kind of just what you did. It was part of the political gain of the political aspect, and unless it affected you directly or personally, then it really didn't apply to you, or it really didn't bother you. And some of the most infamous assassinations in the Roman Empire, evolved around the political scene and political aspirations, like Julius Caesar after he gained popularity after the death of his rulers, and he was declared dictator for life of the Roman Empire. But the Senate, they saw a problem with that. They thought he was going to be a threat to the Roman Empire. So, they what they say: beware the Ides of March. So, in March 15th of 44 BC, he was killed by members of the Senate. One in particular, his best friend Marcus Junius Brutus. And when he was dying, he said, you know, et tu, Brute? So it was like, you too, child. So this kind of started the change of the Roman Empire, where Augustus kind of took over. And speaking of Augustus, Augustus Caesar's great grandson, Caligula, he was also assassinated. He was actually executed by the military. They killed him, they decapitated him, and this led to his replacement, Claudius. And another thing, too, that we could argue is that, Jesus Christ, him being nailed to the cross is some sort of assassination, kind of a personal gain. They didn't believe in him. They thought he was a, threat. He was, spreading hate and things like that. They didn't believe in him. And I guess in this, for a political standpoint, you can say that it was good for their cause of, trying to perhaps overthrow their government and their land. And you could argue that this was an assassination and an attempted assassination that failed in ways, because you get into how he died. He was nailed to the cross and he was killed, but he rose on Easter 3 days later. So you can say and argue that that was a failed attempt. So yeah, there were many leaders that have met their demise due to assassinations, and most of it was either political or personal.
Yeah, one of the earliest recorded assassination groups were the Jewish Sicarii. They were active around 6 AD during the Roman occupation of Israel. This group carried out daring assassinations of Roman soldiers and Jewish collaborators using daggers concealed in their cloaks. That's sort of become an iconic thing. You see pictures that way. These attacks were sometimes executed in broad daylight, after which the assassins would blend into the crowd. That is a technique that has made it to modern times. It's not unusual. One of their most notorious targets was Jonathan the high priest. The term Sicarii is derived from the Latin word sica, meaning a type of dagger. Even today, the word sicario, which is the plural of sicari, in Italian, refers to a hitman or assassin. They still use the term today. Fascinating. As the Middle Ages followed the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the moral and ethical implications of assassination, once merely a political tool, began to evolve. During this period, deliberate regicide was extremely rare, but the situation shifted significantly during the Renaissance. The concept of tyrannomancy, which is the killing of a king or a ruler, when his rule became tyrannical, reemerged and gained prominence. Numerous European monarchs and figures, such as Henry III and Henry IV of France, and the Protestant Dutch leader William the Silent, were assassinated during religious conflicts or by religious adversaries. There were also many failed assassination attempts, such as those against Elizabeth I, of England by religious opponents. And it's interesting that, my family history goes back to some of that because we were related to Mary, Queen of Scots. And of course, we were my ancestors were kind of losing their heads because, in a literal sense, so they kind of escaped from England and went to other places. That's a whole nother story, though. Now, assassinations also entered the religious sphere. For instance, Thomas Becket was appointed Bishop of Canterbury by King Henry II of England due to his role as a trusted advisor and his support for the king's claims on French lands. However, Becket grew dissatisfied with his new position and aligned himself with Pope Alexander III. When Henry II sought Becket's support to reduce papal influence in England, Becket sided with the church and the Pope. Though Henry did not explicitly order Becket's assassination, he famously exclaimed, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" This led to Becket's murder by four knights: Reginald Fitzroos, Hugh de Morville, William de Tracy, and Richard Le Breton. In the Middle Ages, the Hashishin, a Muslim group from the Middle East, became notorious for their close combat assassinations, giving rise to the term assassin. In feudal Japan, ninjas or shinobis recruited from both the aristocracy and the peasantry were employed to spy, commit arson, cause disruptions, and carry out assassinations.
As the world entered the modern era and political conflicts escalated to a global scale, the frequency of assassinations increased significantly. In Russia alone, 5 emperors, tsars, were assassinated within a span of less than 200 years. Ivan VI, Peter III, Paul I, Alexander II, who freed the serfs, and the last Tsar, Nicholas II, who was killed alongside his family, including his wife, Empress Alexandra, and his daughters, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia, as well as his son and heir, Alexei. In the United Kingdom, the only prime minister to be assassinated was Spencer Perceval, who was killed on May 11th, 1812. In early U.S. history, the most prominent assassination victim was President Abraham Lincoln. 3 other U.S. presidents, James Garfield, William McKinley, and John F. Kennedy, were also assassinated. Additionally, several presidents, including Andrew Jackson, Franklin D. Roosevelt, Harry S. Truman, Gerald Ford, and Ronald Reagan, survived assassination attempts. Former President Theodore Roosevelt was shot and wounded during the 1912 presidential campaign. During Lincoln's assassination, plots were also devised against Vice President Andrew Johnson and Secretary of State William H. Seward. However, Johnson's attack was never carried out, and Seward survived his. In Europe, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand by Gavrilo Princip, a member of a group of Serbian nationalist insurgents, set her off for World War I. The Archduke was visiting Bosnia-Herzegovina, a newly annexed territory of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. When navigating on the streets of Sarajevo, Franz Ferdinand's route was redirected, leading him out of a back alley and back onto the main street, where Princip shot and killed both the Archduke and his wife, Sophie, the Duchess of Hohenberg. This assassination outraged the Austro-Hungarian Empire and ultimately triggered World War I.
In the 20th century, nation states started beginning to train to train their people to be enemies, to be fighters, and to kill any enemy of the state that they saw. This was like target killing, and they were killing all their enemies. Like in Czechoslovakia, they had the Czechoslovakian operatives that were being convinced to try to kill General Heydrich. He eventually was killed, though, in Operation Anthropoid, and this all took place in World War II. And they also had people target killing, taking out any enemy by any means necessary. It's like the British and everybody, the British MI6, the CIA, and the SMERSH, the Soviets, they all tried to kill Adolf Hitler. He eventually died, but it wasn't by assassination. They tried to kill him so many times. He was even almost knocked off by his own people that, they had a bomb threat set up. But anyway, he got out of that. He got out of all of his assassinations. There were many people who got out of assassination attempts, kept on getting out, even Fidel Castro and people like Napoleon. There's a whole lot we could go into with that. Mohandas Gandhi, he was killed in January of 48 because there was a man they thought he was betraying Hindu by trying to seek peace with the Muslims. So he was assassinated as well. Uh, and so and they thought he was a deserter. So a lot of these assassinations were done just to get rid of problems, to get rid of threats. And if they saw you as a threat, you were gone.
The 20th century likely marks the first time nation states began systematically training assassins, as Chandler was just saying, to target enemies of the state. For instance, during World War II, MI6 trained a group of Czechoslovak operatives to assassinate Nazi General Reinhard Heydrich, who was eventually killed, as we already said, in their operation known as Operation Anthropoid. No country has seemed to not get in on this, no major country at least, in on this notion of taking care of these quote, problems by killing them. You know, the Cold War witnessed a significant rise in political assassinations, likely fueled by the intense ideological divide between the First and Second Worlds, where such actions were often justified and funded. During the Kennedy administration, for example, Fidel Castro narrowly escaped multiple assassination attempts orchestrated by the CIA as part of its, quote, executive action program and by CIA backed rebels, with reports of explosive shoes. I'm sorry, that just sort of seemed like a humorous thing. Explosive shoes, right? And poisoned clams being used in these efforts. Some believe that Salvador Allende of Chile was another target, though concrete evidence is lacking. The assassination of FBI agent Dan Mitrione by the Uruguayan guerrilla group Tupamaros is often cited as clear evidence of U.S. involvement in Latin American affairs during the Cold War. Simultaneously, the KGB employed assassination to eliminate high-profile defectors like Markov. At the same time, Israel's Mossad used similar tactics against Palestinian guerrillas, politicians, and revolutionaries, though there is debate over whether these targets were solely political figures, militants, or both, perhaps. Many major powers officially renounced such tactics in response to the growing controversy. For example, during Gerald Ford's presidency in 1976, Executive Order 12333 was issued in the U.S. to prohibit political assassinations, though the George W. Bush administration later eased this restriction. Critics argue that these renunciations were more for political or moral appearances, and that covert training of assassins by intelligence agency, such as the U.S. run School of the Americas, continues. And we know that that's true. The debate over these tactics remains active, while accusations that Russia continues to employ them in Chechnya and against Chechens abroad, and that Israel targets Palestinians in similar ways, as seen in the aftermath of the Munich massacre during Operation Wrath of God. Additionally, the Israeli military has frequently targeted Hamas leaders in Gaza. It just continues on. Terrorist organizations also employ assassination tactics, targeting both combatants and non combatants. A notable example is the 1989 assassination of Irish solicitor Finnecane as the Loyalist Ulster Defence Association in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Advancements in technology, they've only made all of this stuff easier. They facilitated. We have precision guided cruise missiles and combat drones that can actually be aimed to hit a single person across the globe and hit them precisely. It's amazing. We spend so much time on the technology for killing people and so little time on trying to find some compromises. And sometimes we even applaud it. I mean, bin Laden, think about that. That was, and I'm not saying that it was wrong to do some of these things, but I am saying we should really think about it.
You certainly should. There was a time when it seemed that most people associated assassination with third world countries, the so-called banana republics. There seems to have been a shift in the mid to late 20th century, with the major nations grabbing the headlines. One of the areas that has seen a sharp increase in assassinations in recent times is the Middle East. You think of Yitzhak Rabin, Anwar Sadat, among many others. Chandler, I understand you took a course in the modern world of the Middle East. Maybe you could share some information on that topic.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, that's actually a good idea. But at first, before we start talking about that, I want to start by talking about some of these assassinations and why they actually took place. I think in order to better understand some of these assassinations, we need to start by talking about, exploring the meanings of them and some of the causes that trigger some of these assassinations that they actually played a big role in the widespread conflict of this stuff. Uh, you know, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, housed and was the cause of numerous assassinations, over decades, and they were often through. It wasn't just assassination. There were a lot of reasons behind it, like we've talked about, and they were assassinations. These attempts were used on both sides to weaken or eliminate or even dominate key figures that they knew or they felt that caused a threat. And these can are seeded from a lot of deep rooted political issues, a lot of ideological and even religious issues. In Israel, this was used as a preemptive measure in order to, regain control and to take out Palestinian leaders who were considered militant and they believed to be threats, planning attacks on Israel, not only just military, but their civilians as well. And they did this is called target killing, like we talked about. It's and this is meant as a tactic to try to destroy operations and get rid of operations and try to dismantle them, try to get rid of their, strip them from all their powers. Uh, there were a lot of leaders that would get assassinated too, and that would trigger a series of assassinations. Like, for example, the leader of the Islamic Jihad or Hamas, terrorist groups, and these were seen as ways to try to get rid of these people because they thought they were threats. Not only that, desire for a retaliation, like these Israelis, they were, you know, taking out these Palestinian leaders. They thought they were being militant, and the Palestinians didn't like that, so they would go start getting revenge. And with these retaliations, you know, they were fighting war, but they were keeping escalating as time went on, and the Palestinians would fire their shot, then the Israelis. It would incite all this violence and all this uproar, and some people were just targeted. Some people were targeted, and they weren't in the military, and they were civilians, but it was seen and it was done to send a message that you might not be part of this group, but you are a symbol for resistance in their group. And that's a problem for us. And they're sending a message to a broader community. And, specific events often triggered assassinations too, like the leaders of, like Islamic Jihad or Hamas, attempted assassinations and assassinations of these leaders. They always try, they always seem to spike a series of assassination attempts. Believe it or not, even peace negotiations and ceasefires would be key for assassinations. It's kind of a paradoxical thing. It's kind of an ironic thing because these peace negotiations and these ceasefires between organizations would lead to more war, more assassination, and more violence because while it was a move to try to stop the war and end the violence, ironically enough, it would incite more violence because people were trying to say that the people that were doing peace organizations and peace treaties and ceasefires, they were seen as traitors or people that would undermine the movement because they were trying to seek peace and neutrality. So they were considered switch ups or traitors, if you will. So overall, these assassinations were used for political gain and personal goals. And it wasn't just one side, it was both sides. So both sides, whether they meant to or not, they kept the war going with all these assassinations. One thing leads to another with this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things when we were looking at this that just struck me that, and I checked on this, and it's actually my original notion was proven to be correct, that assassinations and assassination attempts have consistently shown a cyclical pattern throughout history, with their frequency and justification fluctuating based on the political, social, and technological circumstances of the time. As we've pointed out throughout this, assassinations were commonly used in power struggles within empires, kingdoms, and religious institutions. Yeah, religious institutions. That just really puzzles me a bit. You say one thing and you do something different, and we call it a religion. God, that Lord, please help me with that. I don't understand it. The reasons for these acts varied, but they often focused on removing tyrants, rivals, or perceived threats to the state or religion, as we've already said. The Renaissance saw a revival of the concept of tyrannicide, where rulers were assassinated for alleged tyranny. This era also witnessed an increase in politically motivated killings fueled by religious and political conflicts like the Protestant Reformation. Now, okay, we could do a whole thing on that, but we don't have time here. As nation states became more established, assassinations were frequently associated with nationalist movements or radical ideologies. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, which sparked World War I, is a significant example. This period also experienced a rise in political anarchism, targeting heads of state and other prominent figures. The Cold War brought another surge in assassination attempts, with superpowers like the United States and the Soviet Union using covert operations to eliminate political enemies. This era saw the creation of specialized assassination programs as part of more significant ideological and geopolitical battles. The nature of assassinations has evolved with new technologies. While open assassinations have decreased in favor of diplomatic or legal approaches, covert operations like drone strikes and targeted killings, they remain tools for both state and non-state actors, perpetuating cycles of conflict. As Chandler was pointing out, and you can understand this. If somebody came into your home and shot, murdered, knifed to death a couple of your family members and then sort of laughed and left, you'd want revenge. Well, just multiply that on and think about what's happening when you start killing people. Everybody wants to get back at you. So it continues to escalate. And come on, we're not that stupid. We got to understand that. So while the prevailing power structures, ideologies, and technological advances of each era shape the cyclical nature of assassinations, it just continues. During periods of stability, assassinations tend to decrease, while they increase during times of political turmoil, war, or ideological conflict. One might say one feeds the other. This pattern indicates that as long as power struggles and conflicts persist, assassinations will continue to be used as a measure to achieve political ends. It's a real simple solution. If somebody is dead, they can't cause you any more problems by things they say or do, right? Wrong. Actually, that is so wrong because people get upset about it justifiably and they come after you again. Cyclical, cyclical. I hope you've gained some information from this look at the history of assassinations. We intend to use this information as a focus for the examination of specific assassinations. We will use both this general survey and information about specific assassinations and attempts in our History Twists channel, which you probably really should check out. Hope you do. In which we will pick a specific assassination or attempt and use that as a point of divergence and set forth a different set of events from what happened in the present timeline. Of course, on that channel, we also do other twists in history. We pick some point in history and make a divergence.
You know, this has been very interesting, Dr. Weaver and Dr. Deneen. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to working with you on future podcasts. Bye for now.
It certainly has been very interesting. I'm excited about this new chapter of podcasts. We've already done our first history twist about an African assassination. Check that out. But I hope everyone's enjoyed this episode and will join us again soon. It was good to welcome Chandler. He's really been a very valuable asset, and I look forward to some very exciting work to come.
And likewise.
Goodbye for now, friends.
Say, TTFN for me. I think this is going to be great. This is sort of a new venture for us, diving into going back and forth between things you don't know, which is factual, and then being able to amplify and change things with history twists. I'm very excited about that. I'm excited about working with Chandler. He's an interesting fella who has some experience in communication of all sorts. He's a communication major. He better have some experience. Um,
Absolutely.
and he does radio and TV. And hey, that's cool. And hey, we want you to give us a like if you can, and subscribe. It's free, doesn't cost you anything, and that way you can keep up with our craziness. So for now, bye. Have a good day.
Come on, folks.